Not every NBA roster can be loaded with stars. Role players are so important to a good basketball team. Of course, we know the Sacramento Kings weren't a good basketball team this season, but there were three role players in particular on this team from day one to the final day of the season whose futures may be in question. I'm talking about Chimezie Metu, Damian Jones, and Terence Davis. On this final Locked On Kings season review, we'll talk about the year that they had, what their futures look like in Sacramento, plus, of course, commentary and analysis from Kings radio broadcaster Gary Gerould right here on the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member the last 7 years, just wrapped up my 8th season covering Kings basketball. This is my 5th year hosting the Locked On Kings podcast, and I have the pleasure of working for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And if you've missed my 5 Kings season reviews before this 6th and final one today, you need to go and check those out. Did one on De'Aaron Fox, did one on Davion Mitchell, did one on Harrison Barnes, one on Kings general manager Monty McNair / associate head coach Alvin Gentry. And then I did one on a group of players, the 6 players that the Kings acquired at the trade deadline. This final one focuses on 3 other Kings players who were here all season long: Terence Davis, Chimezie Metu, and Damian Jones. We'll talk about all 3 of these guys, what they did well, where they struggled, look at some of their numbers. We'll also talk about what their futures look like, give you an update on their contract situation, whether or not I feel they can be good fits for the Sacramento Kings continuing forward onto next season, what kind of role that they could have for this Kings team. But that's all coming after analysis and insight for the final time from Gary Gerould, legendary Sacramento Kings radio play-by-play announcer. G-Man has been with me for every single one of these reviews. I could not be more thankful for him taking the time here on Locked On Kings to share his thoughts, to share his insight with us. Really appreciate that from him. So for the final time, here are G-Man's thoughts on Terence Davis, Chimezie Metu, and Damian Jones in this Sacramento Kings season review. I got 2 more questions for you, and they all have to do with 3 players who were on this team all season long. I'm talking about Damian Jones, Chimezie Metu, and Terence Davis. I want to start with Damian Jones because he has won me over in such a major way, G-Man, to where I am hoping that he comes back. Both Kyle, I think it was Kyle. I can't remember. It was Kenny Thomas who said on the Kings pregame show, or rather postgame show with Kyle Draper, they were talking about whether or not it should be on the Kings priority list to try and bring Damian Jones back. And to me, he should be on the priority list. He has proven to be a consistent, and I think that's the big word for me with him, is consistently I know what he provides on a nightly basis, to where he played minutes as a starter and it didn't look like he didn't belong. He came in off the bench in some games, made a significant impact. I'm realistic with what to expect from him, but he is not someone that I would be upset with having on the Kings for another contract and another stint here. What did you see from him, and not just his play this year, but his development over the last couple of years here in Sacramento?
Well, the development, here's a guy who in my mind is in the process of paying his dues and has paid his dues. And he's been in the league, 6 years now or something like that. And he's showed what he's capable of doing. And I love the fact that he was always ready. It seemed like you go through stretches where he didn't get very much playing time, but when he was called on, he'd make a contribution. And I like the effort. I get to know him a little bit as an individual, and he's got an effervescent type of a personality. And I think he enjoys what he's doing. And I'm big on people having fun when they're working. And I think it's important, if you're going to have success, you've got to enjoy that journey. And I think he clearly enjoys it. And now he's graduated to the point where he's going to generate some interest around the league. And I think he'll have some offers thrown in his direction. And it'll be interesting to see, what the Kings think and how much they want to rely on him to being one of those pieces, be it as a role player off the bench or whatever. But clearly it's been fun watching him down the stretch of this season. And he's been one of the real bright spots.
You could say the same to some extent for Chimezie Metu and his development here in Sacramento. And he had a big moment. I think it was this season that he had the game-winning three-pointer that he hit this season earlier on in the year, or maybe that was last season. They all tie together for me. It was this year. Right. Thank you. And then, so I'm going to lump him in with Terence Davis, who unfortunately we haven't seen for a while because of his season-ending injury. And he's someone that I think, and a lot of fans think, would have fit in excellent with the Kings, this now post-trade version of the Sacramento Kings. Those two names, we don't know about their futures in Sacramento or by any means, but just any thoughts that come to mind with those two players, what you saw from them this season and what they could continue to be in Sacramento.
Well, let's start with Chimezie. I love the fact that he has so much confidence in himself. He's not afraid to shoot that perimeter three. He's not afraid to go inside and challenge big bodies. And I love seeing the development from him. He spent his first couple of years in the Spurs organization with Popovich, and I think that's certainly was beneficial to him. I think that in Sacramento, it remains to be seen if he's going to be one of those pieces or not. I think he's proved that he's worthy of consideration. There's no question about that. As for Terence Davis, I'm really intrigued. I think the Kings really missed having him down the stretch. And like you say, you'd want to stretch the offense, and he's one of those guys who can do it. And we saw him, he streaky as can be. When he gets it going, look out. I mean, he can light it up and put up big numbers in a hurry. I've watched him in the late stages of the season after they had the protective device taken off of his wrist. He had the surgery. I watched him first with it on numerous times out there just working, breaking amazing sweat, but doing everything with the left hand. And I'm thinking, when he comes back, he's got a new weapon because he's going to be able to fool some people and use the left hand. Then he gets rid of the protective device on the right wrist, and I've seen him again working out. I watched him the other night, and I lost track, but he launched somewhere in the vicinity of 120 three-point shots, working around the horn in both directions, and he knocked down somewhere around 70 to 75 of that 120. And yes, you could see the fatigue factor setting in. There wasn't the lift in the legs late in that session, but he really works hard. And I love guys that work hard. And I'm intrigued by him. I think as young as he is, as athletic as he is, and as good of a three-point shooter as he is and can be even better, he could have a great future off the Sacramento Kings bench.
This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by NBA Prize Picks. If you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA, you need to try the award-winning app Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love this app. I know you will too. It takes all the hassle out of normal NBA fantasy, and it's great because you can play at any time of the year. You can even pick it up and start playing right now, even though we're in the playoffs. Yeah. Fantasy sports, NBA fantasy still going on at Prize Picks, even though the Sacramento Kings and regular season is done with. And Prize Picks is very easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and over under on their projections. You can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. Prize Picks is safe. They offer fast withdrawals. You can use their award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play right now, and they offer props across the board, any props that you could think of, from points scored to rebounds to steals. They also allow mixed sport entries. You can bet on basketball while also betting on baseball right now. They have so much: basketball, baseball, college football, NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and so much more. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for Locked On Kings listeners. You can get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a single point, but you must use promo code NBA to cash in on that offer. Again, promo code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. Make sure you are playing fantasy basketball the way it was meant to be played with Prize Picks. I really wonder what the Sacramento Kings would have looked like and if their shooting issues after the trade deadline would have been significantly better, or at least noticeably better, had Terence Davis been available to play. Terence Davis, it feels like he was out basically the entire season. He did play 30 games for the Sacramento Kings this season, and in those 30 games, he was as streaky as he is known to be. Terence Davis, still young, known for his outside shooting, although did have some defensive moments, did have some moments where he got his teammates involved, also put the ball on the floor and attacked the basket a little bit. But Terence Davis's ability to space the floor, his potential replacement for Buddy Hield as a shooter, is what got him traded to Sacramento last season, and what interested so many Kings fans, I guess is the best way to say. Davis, significantly cheaper than Buddy Hield is, doesn't need to take the high volume of threes that Buddy Hield does in order to be effective. The Kings also don't or wouldn't necessarily rely on Terence Davis as heavily as they rely on Buddy Hield, especially after this trade deadline. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see what Terence Davis could have been with this Kings group. And I do believe that he would have been a nice fit. He would have certainly added to the Kings floor spacing that really struggled after trading away their best shooters. So looking at the numbers for Terence Davis this season, in the 30 games that he played for the Sacramento Kings, his scoring dipped a little bit from last season's 27 games with the Kings to this season, from 11.1 points to 10.4, but that's not really that significant. He only played about 18 minutes per game, shot 42% from the field, 32% from three-point range. That's a number that needs to come up if Terence Davis is going to carve himself a role for the Sacramento Kings team going forward. And he shot 5 3-pointers per game, making 1.6. His free throw percentage, really strong, one of the best on the team at 81, rounded up to 82%. Also grabbed around 3 rebounds, 1 assist per game. Terence Davis's contract situation is as follows. He basically has 1 more year under contract for the Sacramento Kings, owed $4 million next season, as he was owed $4 million this season. So as an expiring contract, Davis is someone who could be moved this offseason potentially, or he could be someone that easily the Kings bring back. And out of the 3 players we're talking about, Davis, Metu, and Jones, if there is one that is more than likely going to be coming back, I think it's Terence Davis. But the question is, in what kind of role? Because to me, as much as I see the fit that Terence Davis can be, and I've had conversations about what does that starting 2 spot look like for the Sacramento Kings going forward, or if the Kings were to deal Harrison Barnes, what does their starting 3 spot look like? And I've had people say, what about Terence Davis? He could be that starting 2. He could be that starting 3. Yeah, I do have recency bias. But from my memory of watching Terence Davis play, the inconsistencies concern me more than the inconsistencies of DiVincenzo or Davion Mitchell or Harrison Barnes, significantly more. I think Terence Davis is far more streaky. He can be that volume shooter and scorer that can give you a great game and a barrage of points off the bench from time to time. But as a starter, someone who you're going to be relying on to hit a lot of shots and score a decent amount of points when out there with both De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, again, I think the 2 of them could get him good looks, and he could make teams pay for crashing hard or double teaming Sabonis or Fox, meeting them at the rim. But even in a 30-game sample size, even though there was a fair few games where he had solid performances, especially towards the end before he got hurt and had a season-ending injury, I'm just not convinced. I do believe Terence Davis could be a nice option for the Kings coming off the bench, especially, let's say the Kings don't add any significant upgrade to that 2 spot. Let's say De'Aaron Fox and Donte DiVincenzo, you're starting 1 and 2. You have Davion Mitchell coming off the bench as your 6th man. Terence Davis is not a bad 7th. Someone who can come into the game if Donte DiVincenzo is struggling offensively right away, can play with Fox, can play with Mitchell, and if you want to go small, can easily step into that 3 spot as well. The versatility of Davis as a scorer, I think, is important at 6'4". So I like the idea of Terence Davis returning to the Sacramento Kings next season. I just don't like the idea necessarily of Terence Davis being a starter. But I'm curious your thoughts on that. Send them to me at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. If there is a unsung MVP of the season for the Sacramento Kings, I'm giving it to Damian Jones. Damian Jones impressed the hell out of me this year. And he earned every opportunity he got this year, especially when he basically took over the starting center spot when both Domantas Sabonis, when Domantas Sabonis was hurt and when Richaun Holmes was out because of his personal issues that he's going through right now. Damian Jones played very, very well. And I think Damian Jones could be a great, maybe not great, a good to fine, solid rotational big man for the Kings. I think he could be a very nice asset off the bench. And what I like the most about Damian Jones is I know what I'm getting from Damian Jones on a nightly basis. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's numbers related. It doesn't mean he's going to grab 10 rebounds a night. It doesn't mean he's going to score 10 points a night. But I know Damian Jones is going to come in. He's going to play with energy. He's going to play with hustle. He's going to crash the boards. Defensively, he's at least going to have a presence in the paint. I love what Damian Jones brings. Now, I don't love that Damian Jones isn't under contract for next year. Damian Jones, an unrestricted free agent. Now, I don't think Jones is going to demand a high price tag on the open market, but the Kings cap space right now, especially if they're going to be bringing back Donte DiVincenzo, which we expect them to do so, especially if they want to keep their books flexible to maybe go and make another splash this offseason. They might not have a whole lot of money to be willing to spend on a guy like Jones, even if he has upside. He just might not be worth it to them. To me, he's worth it. I like Damian Jones a lot, especially if you're going to be dealing Richaun Holmes as your backup big. But, I mean, Damian Jones made $1.9, basically $2 million this year. I don't expect him to make too much more money than that in free agency this year. Maybe he gets 3, maybe he gets 4. Are the Kings comfortable paying him $3 to $4 million, maybe over, let's say, $3 to $4 million a year on a 2 or 3 year deal? I certainly don't hate it. You might be able to get him for cheaper. But I also wouldn't be surprised if a team does come in, a team that is looking, a good team that is looking for the rotational minutes and presence that Damian Jones provides. I mean, remember, Damian Jones came from the Golden State Warriors organization, so he has their eye already. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Warriors try to get him back. Would he choose that over Sacramento? I wouldn't blame him for doing so. I hope Damian Jones returns. And he had a good season for the Sacramento Kings this year. Played in 56 games, started in 15, averaged 8 points a game, only 4 rebounds. That's a number that I would like to see come up. 1.2 assists, also just shy of a block shot. He shot 66, if you round up, 66% from the field. Extremely efficient around the rim. And actually did hit a couple of three-pointers this year, shot 34% from three-point range. His free throw percentage at 71%, of course, could come up. But overall, very solid season for Damian Jones. Very happy with what I saw. I hope he remains a Sacramento King next year. Chimezie Metu is, I guess, and this might seem harsh, the least exciting for me out of the three. And it's not because I don't like Metu by any means, because I'm a fan of Chimezie Metu's. I think he plays very, very hard. I think he carved out a role for himself last season and had to work hard coming back from injury. Remember when Jonas Valanciunas pulled him off the rim and hurt himself? He was on a roll at that point in time, and he had to work his way back to that. And Metu played in stretches where he was a starter, an important piece for the Kings, and then he played in stretches where he didn't get on the floor at all. It was kind of an up and down season for Chimezie Metu. He had a great moment, like his game winner, as G-Man pointed out, against the Dallas Mavericks. And then he had games where he was on the floor, but you wouldn't really notice it. Stats-wise, he continues to improve every single year. Averaged just shy of 9 points per game. Shot 45% from the field, 30% from three-point range, 78% from the free throw lines. Played in 60 games for the Kings, so he was always available. 20 of those games he started. 5 rebounds, or just shy of 6 rebounds, an assist, and a steal a game. Like, Chimezie Metu's numbers aren't bad. But again, this is where we talk about fringe talent. All 3 of these guys can be labeled that we're talking about as fringe talent. And the Kings have too much fringe talent on this roster, in my opinion, to be a good basketball team. So maybe you can get away with keeping 2 of these guys. Keeping all 3 of them, I think, is pushing it. Now, it might be fair to say, just because of their contract situations, that if the Kings are going to hold on to 2, it's more than likely going to be Terence Davis and Chimezie Metu over Damian Jones. Because Chimezie Metu is technically under contract for the Kings next season for $1.9 million. However, none of that money is guaranteed, meaning the Kings can waive him and that money's off the books. They don't have to pay it out. It doesn't affect their cap, nothing. They can get rid of Chimezie Metu this offseason if they want to, even though he is under contract for one more season. They have the option. It's essentially a team option. So I wouldn't hate to see Chimezie Metu back. I don't know what his role would be if he does come back. If you're looking for a big man rotation player that could actually serve a role on the Kings going forward, I like Damian Jones over Chimezie Metu in that spot. That's me personally, unless you upgrade your backup center position, which, I mean, there might be options out there. I don't know. But out of these three players, if the Kings only picked one, I think they'd pick Terence Davis. If they picked two out of the three, I would pick Terence Davis and Damian Jones. Actually, I would pick Damian Jones over Terence Davis personally, but that I don't think that's realistic. And if it were the Kings, if it were Monte McNair, it would probably be Metu and Davis. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if only one of these three guys are back. I would be pretty surprised if none of these three guys are back. I'm pretty sure that McNair likes Davis enough that he's not going anywhere. But again, he is an expiring contract that could be moved this offseason. So out of those three guys, tell me a little bit about what you thought about their season, what you think about their futures with the Sacramento Kings. Let me know what you're thinking. At MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. I have more great content for you coming on Locked On Kings next week. I'll preview 4 episodes of very different topics that we're going to be discussing as the offseason continues to get underway here. After I tell you about BetOnline, they were with us all season long, and they can continue to make you money even during the offseason. Use your Kings knowledge to cash in with the #1 source for all your betting stats and sports information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. So now that you have 6 straight days of Locked On Kings season reviews, we can focus on the offseason and the future. No podcast tomorrow unless you're listening to this on Sunday. If so, I hope you're having a great Sunday. On Monday, I'm expected to be joined by Jill Adge, and we are going to go through the recent list of candidates by both Woj and Shams that were reported that the Kings have requested and gotten permission to have interviews for, plus other names that could be out there for the Kings coaching search, which names we like, which names we would potentially avoid. Jill is so good at getting you the extra information that you didn't necessarily know about both candidates you've heard of and maybe some candidates that you haven't heard of. Jill and I will discuss that in great detail on Monday. On Tuesday, I'm expected to be joined by my colleague from ABC 10, Walt Gray. We're going to discuss maybe a bit of a controversial topic, which is looking at the 16 straight years of the Kings being bad in this playoff drought. Are the fans somewhat to blame for that? Are they somewhat to blame for the Kings losing culture? Again, controversial, but Walt has some thoughts on that. We'll discuss that. And then on back-to-back episodes, I'm going to be joined by my friend Franklin Cardicelli from the Return of the Roar podcast, my former coworker at Sports 1140 KHTK. Frankie and I are going to discuss 2 very different things. One, the recent comments from DeMarcus Cousins in an article earlier this week, kind of bashing the Kings, but saying some things that honestly I and maybe Frankie agree with. We'll discuss that. And then the final episode with Frankie, the second episode on Thursday, at least that's the plan, is a hypothetical, what if the Sacramento Kings won the draft lottery and got the #1 overall pick? What would be the different scenarios that the Kings could play out this offseason? Which would be more likely? Frankie and I will discuss that. That's all coming next week on the Locked On Kings podcast. I hope you'll join me for all of those episodes. Appreciate you joining me for all or one of these reviews. If you missed some of the reviews, I encourage you to go back and check them out and make sure you're sharing with me your thoughts on any of the players, coaches, general managers that we reviewed during this series. Please feel free to leave your thoughts on that. Also, huge thank you to the G-Man, Gary Gerould, for joining me in each one of these episodes. A real treat, as always, to have him on. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I can't wait to have you join me next week. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.